Hello, can you understand me? Hello?
Hey, how you doing,
Hey,
Tom?
hey, thanks for joining.
No problem.
How are you?
I am fine. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
So
Like
tell
the,
me a little bit about yourself, because I see you're working on a paper. I see you also work with Akira Labs. Oh, by the
yes,
way,
yes,
that
yes,
J
I
thing,
do.
that's my note taker and recorder. So I'm old. I take bad notes.
Yeah, I know Fireflies AI. So,
Anyway,
um,
so yeah, I'm
yeah,
all ears.
okay, yeah. So basically, I am at the moment doing my master thesis in Hamburg at the KLU. That's like a logistics university specialized in supply chain management.
Right.
And in cooperation with Akio Labs, I'm doing a thesis because I met Christoph, one of the founders,
Hmm.
um, during during my time at the university because he was doing his PhD there.
Right.
So there was like the first connection, and then he came to me because he searched for a master thesis at the university. So yeah, I decided to start a collaboration with him, and since then it's like now the first month in. So basically, I started at the 1st September, and yeah, I was doing a literature review so far, and now I'm starting with the interviews. For the thesis, and yeah, basically the topic is to conduct research on uh, the AI on the strategic procurement process. Yeah,
Okay. All right. So listen, I'm all ears. Fire away. Whatever
yeah,
questions.
yeah, perfect. So yeah, I would start with the interview then now.
Yeah.
Before that, I have to ask you if you want to participate anonymously
No,
in
that's
this
fine.
interview.
No, that's
Okay,
fine.
perfect. Then before I will start the recording, if that's also okay for you, I will record
Yeah.
um I will give you just a bit like an introduction on the structure of the interview so you know what should be the outcome
Sure.
of the interview. Yeah, the interview will have like three subsections. The first section is going to be, yeah, about your background information, like what is your role? What is your role regarding strategic procurement? So that the reader gets like an understanding where your standing is. Then we're gonna continue, with the most promising applications of generative AI in the procurement process. Um, I want to hear your opinion there, and then I will guide you through with some insights I have already, found out during my literature review, and we're going to discuss that together. So, and then we're going over to the I say like the current maturity of generative AI in the procurement process. So I'm going to ask you if you know any adoptions already, and also what are the challenges and like the enablers for the implementation of them. And the last section is going to be about um, yeah the transformation of the strategic procurement process due to the generative AI implementation. So how is going to be like the process? Do they change? Do they get more efficient, or and also how the role of like a category manager, for example, will change in the future.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Then I would start the recording now, and then we're gonna start. So, first question: could you briefly introduce your role in the strategic procurement?
All right. That's an interesting point. I've been in high tech and procurement for more than 40 years. And through that period of time, uh, there have been watershed moments. And one of the most was when the Government of Canada's Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program funded my research into a theory I developed called strand commonality, where there were attributes within seemingly disparate streams of data that were actually related one to the other and had a collective impact. And what I did with the Department of National Defense is I put together the architecture for an application, a platform that used self-learning advanced algorithms within a nascent AI system. And what ultimately happened, I'll give you the end result, and then I'll tell you what was the big figure here, because the surprise is when it comes to GenAI, AI, or procure tech in general, technology is largely irrelevant. And I'll explain that statement here. It is not a technology play. But with implementation and the process I use, an agent-based versus an equation-based model, I understood how the individual pieces worked within the procurement realm, but also how other stakeholders, both within and external to the enterprise, were able to impact the performance and the utilization of technology. So, for example, when I first went into the D&D, they had asked me, well, why don't you automate the procurement side? This is for MRO direct material, MRO indirect material goods to support their IT infrastructure, the bases across Canada. And I said, well, before I automate, I need to understand. So the first thing I asked was, what time of day do the orders come in? And the requests. And they looked at me and said, what does that have to do with anything? I'll say, you'll see. So they told me it comes in later in the day. I looked at the operation, agent-based. You don't even look at technology. You don't lead with technology. You look at people, process, technology. That's the common thread. So I looked in the service department who submitted the orders. They had the technicians who were being compensated and rewarded for having so many service calls in a day. And they didn't want to take the time after each call, even though it was policy, to submit a request and an order to the procurement people. So what they do is sandbag the orders until the end of the day. Now, why does that matter? Because MRO product, the price in the morning, first of all, for one product, the same product can be $100. By 4 o'clock, that same product can be worth $1,000. So if you're getting all the orders in at the end of the day, then you aren't getting the best price. But there was another challenge on that with regards to the delivery performance, is that 70-80% of all the parts that were being sourced were from the United States, which meant it had to go through customs clearance, which also created problems. So here's the situation. When they brought me in, they said, look, we have a contract with the Department of National Defense. We have a SLA contractual obligation performance of 90% next day. We're at 51%. We're at risk of losing the contract. So that agent-based, and this is why I'm telling you this now as I'm expanding, because then I looked at it and I said, okay, well, we won't necessarily be able to change the behavior of how the service department operates and their motivations, but if we understand how they operate, we can then structure processes to leverage technology to take advantage of that. For example, most of the vendors providing the parts were small, medium enterprises. They had no expertise in dealing with international shipping. It was a narrowed scope because of the time of day, so you only had maybe 3 or 5 vendors available to quote. That's why the price gets so high. And then when you ordered the product, because it had to clear customs, it would usually hit customs, ended up sitting there for a day or two. So then we went in, and so the first agent I looked at was the service department. Then the second agent I considered to be the vendor. And I looked and said, how can we streamline the process of engaging them? Now that we know the price, because there's a dynamic flux and a historic flat line, and a dynamic flux price is more MRO, where they can change throughout a day, versus a direct material, which you negotiate a contract and the price stays pretty steady. So we went to develop a system, a platform using the algorithms that enabled us to get out to more vendors in a short period of time electronically. They would bid. And remember, this is the late 90s, early 2000. They would bid. And what ultimately would happen is the algorithms would start learning and rank the suppliers based upon weighted importance of certain characteristics. For example, delivery performance, pricing, historic, what I call historic, delivery performance, quality of product, all these other elements, and also had a weighted average of current events like pricing, like time of day of order. All of those factors came in. So what ended up happening is that we had more and more suppliers coming on board because it was an easy system to respond to. It was probably the first reverse auction module built for the industry, procurement industry. And what ended up happening is, so they got an easy system. They could respond. The system with the weighted averages would be able to say, okay, if delivery is the most important, the buyer could emphasize that, and it would rank the suppliers, responding suppliers, based on their delivery performance. If it was a price, the buyer had the flexibility to say, price is really more important. We don't need the delivery. And then the algorithms would automatically re-rank the suppliers based upon the heavier weighted price standpoint. So that was the second agent. We got them working. And then when a winning vendor was selected, they press the button and print a PDF, PO, and we'd be ready to go. And then the order would automatically track. However, producing or generating the order for the vendor, and I'm going into a lot more detail than I usually do, with the vendor, the problem is they could pick and pack it and ship it, but if they didn't have experience with a courier, or their courier was inefficient, or they didn't understand customs documents, then that would be a problem. So the third agent we dealt with was the courier company. UPS approached us and said, can we build a system with you, co-build a system, whereas when a vendor receives the order, we automatically, through your system, assign a waybill number, print out the documentation so the vendor doesn't have to do anything. Remember, they're small, medium enterprises, they can just pick them like that. And simultaneously dispatch one of our trucks, one of our couriers. So we built an interface with that third agent so that when a vendor got the order, remember, it could be any time of day or night, but let's say, later in the day, the vendor got the order, they bid, they responded, they received the PDF of the purchase order, they received the PDF of the packing slip, the waybill number, etc. Then the fourth agent we brought into the game was the customs people. And we said, okay, what documents do we need to have pre-filled and pre-printed? How can we get this next day delivery? Because we're not going to change the buying habits or the sourcing habits to say, okay, well, we now have to buy mostly in Canada, or we now have to avoid dealing with customs. And so we were able to work with the customs people so that when the order came and a supplier was selected, print out the PDF, print out the waybill number. They didn't have to call a shipper, and print out a pre-filled customs document for priority clearance. Now, what was the end result of that? Within 3 months, they went from 51% next day delivery to 97% next day delivery. Within 18 months, they went from 23 collective buyers down to 3 collective buyers. And ultimately, they were able to consistently year over year reduce the cost or the price they spent on parts by about 23%. Now, that is, again, the whole idea is we use an agent-based model. If I'd gone in there with an equation-based technology first or process first model and just narrowed it to the procurement department, we would have automated and sped up an inefficient system because there still would have been those other elements and problems. So that's what we did. And again, it was the architecture, the algorithms that I structured were, again, self-learning. So the more it got used, the more it learned. Now, it expanded the scope of engagement for us because the ease of which we were able to engage and help suppliers generate revenue or vendors generate revenue, more vendors started to come into the equation. And gradually, some of the orders, although it wasn't necessary for success, some of the service technicians started to send their orders in a little bit earlier because they sort of realized that they were having a negative impact. But we couldn't change their behavior overnight. So if we had implemented a solution, said, okay, now you got to do this, that wasn't going to happen. You're going to struggle. So what you do is you work around it and then expand. And so the whole chain of an agent-based model is to say technology became the last piece of the puzzle. The first piece was, again, understanding the people process technology, people process technology stream. Ultimately, We use that for the New York City Transit Authority, where I create a time zone SSL site polling because they're supporting the 5 boroughs, and create an algorithm that would look and calculate the closest possible source for that product in that particular borough, and would go to the first source, second source, third source, and if for whatever reason it wasn't in inventory there, it would automatically get shifted over to sourcing to go through what we did with the D&D. It was a different system, but we had a core platform. We were able to add something to that core with the New York City Transit Authority. Shortly after that, I sold the company, which I regret to this day, for $12 million in 2001, and have since been writing for Procurement Insights blog and on the speaking circuit, and consulting with both practitioners and providers in that regard. So that's a history, but I want you to understand the core of my thinking, because technology, and I will say this, 15 years from now, we're going to look back on today's technology with the same dismissive attitude we have towards dot matrix printers, CPM, and 2800 baud modems. I don't even know if you remember that. You're a young fellow, but those were the days of punch cards and 8-inch floppy drives and all of those things. And I've seen that. Now, the one consistency here is that technology will always evolve. It will always improve and become more stable. I used to do programming on DBase 2, which was a fun ride way back when in the early 80s. But the reality is that no matter how advanced the technology becomes, unless you utilize an agent-based model, you'll never get anywhere. So that's really where a short synopsis of who, what I am, what I think, what I do, and why I do what I do.
Perfect. Yeah, so basically you already answered a little bit of my second question, is like, what is your current experience of generative AI and its application in procurement? You've mentioned some.
Well, now I've got research papers. I've got archives of papers because the prolific writer, I've also written, just as a side note, I don't know if you've heard of organizations like Sourcing Industry Group and Procurement Foundry, but I've done with Procurement Foundry for the first couple of years, I did the bulk of their writing and ghostwriting. Then I did it for Sourcing Industry Group. So, you've probably read a lot of what I've written already. And the thing is this is the one salient truth that it goes throughout, is that their high rate of initiative failure has been around 80%. ERPs, AI, GenAI. Let's go to GenAI. I interviewed a company yesterday for a client. GenAI, realistically speaking, AI is what people should be focusing on. GenAI is not something that most organizations have mastered yet. GenAI, it's like ChatGPT. You still need the human interface. You still need the expertise to understand what's happening, to be able to assess the information, to make the right kind of decisions. So when you talk about chat, or when you talk about GenAI, and I equate it to ChatGPT, I look at it like a progression from my old Funk and Wagnalls and Britannica library to Google searches to more efficient searches on ChatGPT. I mean, there's the generative element of it. It'll generate, but it's mostly data scraping. And that's at the root of all of it. Does the ability, most of the organizations I talk to don't have advanced algorithms that can actually intelligently learn and be able to actually make recommendations. You always need somebody to be at the helm. But the trouble is that far too many organizations, when they think of AI and Gen AI, they think of an abdication. It's not an abdication. It's a tool and extension. It's agent-based modeling will work for Gen AI and work for whatever is 15 years from now, just like it worked with regards to the 20, 30 years ago, or when I developed it 20 years ago. So the reality is when I think about Gen AI, I think it's a lot of sizzle. I think there's a lot of people posting old AI onto new. Like, give you an idea, one company I was doing extensive research with said, we're like an operating system. What we do is we provide these systems, the current platforms, with our technology that gives them an AI element, and we integrate it on that basis. But ultimately, Gen AI doesn't mean you take your foot off the pedal and you say, I can trust the system. And that's the key. What GenAI can do, just like AI, and it's nothing new. GenAI isn't revolutionary. AI's been around since the 50s. Algorithms have been around since the turn of the last century. This isn't new. It's a more expanded utilization of it. However, we have to expand our capabilities and understanding of how to use it. And I think that's where it comes key. And far too many practitioners abdicate their responsibility for making GenAI work. What they'll do is they'll go to a company, and there's an old saying, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. They would go to a company, and the company would say, well, we'll just toss this over to you, the practitioners. You'll figure it out because you're IBM or XYZ. The difference now with GenAI and everything else is that the technical company alone, you're not buying technology. The technology is really secondary to the expertise and the experience behind the creator of the technology and their ability to collaborate with the right digital ready customers. You get those two factors coming together, then you will get success. But again, they're still trying to take the scalability off the shelf, and everybody's Gen AI. Everybody's doing this. It's noise. You have to look at the people behind the vendor or the solution provider and say, what is their experience and expertise? You have to look at the practitioner side, the client or customer side, and say, are they in the right mindset to succeed? I've talked to many VPs, senior execs from large solution providers who said they've taken on deals and contracts that they knew would not work because the client wasn't ready. They weren't digitally ready. But we did, because we have stock prices to worry about. We have VC investor quarterly things to hit, all of those things. The reality is today, yesterday, and well into the future, agent-based modeling and the core principles for success, the success that I had, that's going to be constant. And there'll be all other kinds of amazing breakthroughs and other kinds of technology. But at the end of the day, the same foundational rules apply. It's like physics, the rules of gravity, the rules of all these things. They don't change. We may evolve, we may do different things, but the agent-based versus equation-based is the way in which you can leverage technology in any era and any generation.
Okay, thanks. So then we will go on now to the strategic procurement process and how GenAI can help to optimize these processes, and we will go through step by step through the strategy process. And I would like to start first with the buzzword category strategies. Do you think that GenAI can enhance the process somehow?
Well, it's interesting. Some experts and some people out there say that category management is dead. It doesn't exist anymore. And others say this. Look, when it comes to, let's start with the basic of strategic sourcing. And see, this is where our industry, by the way, gets it's muddied water. Are you purchasing? Are you procurement? Are you strategic sourcing? Are you this? The procurement professional today has to be all of those things and then some. Strategic sourcing means that you have to be able to identify what products you want. Are they dynamic flux or historic flatline? Are you indirect material or direct material? I can send you a paper I wrote, or I might have sent you a link already to the dangerous supply chain myths. I'm not sure, but I'll send that. But you have to understand commodity characteristics. Within the agent-based framework, you have to look at that. That really is the category, because some products, some parts, MROs, the price fluctuation is like this, and it's constantly going down. Now, one of the biggest problems organizations ran into that, and that's where you got to think differently about strategic sourcing, is that they would do an ERP implementation for direct material goods, which you negotiate the price and it stays relatively stable. The concern is how do we respond if there's an interruption in our supply chain? Are you following me on this?
Yeah.
And then on the other side, so they would implement ERP systems to be able to do that, and they realize amazing savings right out of the gate. But those savings, as soon as the efficiencies were implemented, that portion of savings, And remember, we're talking about 20% of their efforts on 80% of their spend. Where indirect, where MRO materials are the opposite, 80% of your effort for 20% of your spend. So what would happen is they would then try to get more mileage out of their implementation that they put in for direct material. And they would do as soon as a pull-through strategy saying, well, let's negotiate contracts with indirect materials, MROs, and all these other elements. And we'll negotiate a contract. We'll do a vendor compression strategy. We'll reduce the number of vendors. We'll get volume discounts, and we'll be happy. The problem is with direct or indirect dynamic flux material, the price almost drops daily from the point of view of negotiating the contract. So, for example, one of the largest U.S. Tech retailers called me in to do an analysis in 2005. They had compressed their supply base down to 100, and they said, "Look at the volume discount we're getting." The trouble is everything else was excluded beyond the 100. So their only source of truth was those 100 suppliers. They could only judge performance on that. They weren't set up to engage a broader range of suppliers or bring on as many suppliers as possible. So when I went with the system and did the analysis, they were paying something like 20-25% above going rate for the parts, because each month, each year, the price would go down, but they only had the 100 that they negotiated the static price. And they didn't have the methodology or setup to be able to engage a large number of suppliers. See, that's where AI and all this starts coming into effect, is because in many cases, things like vendor rationalization wasn't a great strategy. What it was a result of a system, a platform, technology at that point in time that couldn't accommodate real-time information gathering and engagement and processing for all these small orders. Do you see what I'm saying? So when you look at category, everyone says, okay, this is a category, this is a category, this is a category. What I think you have to do is, first of all, start in the point of origin. Is it a dynamic flux product or a historic flatline product? Is it direct material or indirect material? That's where real category management comes in, as far as I'm concerned. It may seem oversimplified, because you run into different areas. Like for example, and I don't want to digress too far off the path with Cisco. When they're developing a product, they build what you can call a preliminary supply chain for that, and they look and say, what's available on that? Can we build it? Can we get it? Now, companies are that you have these agreements. But if there's an interruption in the supply chain, they then have to go to secondary providers, tertiary supply providers, and that price rises anyway. So, there's that strategic element sourcing crossover there. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about category management, we have to redefine and simplify category management. And then we have to recognize what is the data and information we are getting. Most of it is data scraping. Most of it is information that's out there that the system brings back in, some of it more intelligently than others. The reality, however, is that the management and that data scraping, while it's faster and more convenient, you still need the expertise of the people to be able to determine, decipher what that means. So AI, GenAI, as they call it, and all the technology in the world can certainly gain you access to that. But you still need the feet on the ground expertise and experience to be able to look at that and say, does this make sense? Or if I have to change a model on the fly, does that make sense? But a lot of the information you get, like ESG, all of these other things, the elements that you have to worry about, many of the information, the data that's being scraped is outdated or static. All it is coming to you faster. Like, the D&B, for example, Dun & Bradstreet, with their information, one of the biggest complaints companies had is how recent and current is that information. Now, when you have compliance pressures with ESG, and that's a strategic sourcing element. So you've got to think beyond products when it comes to strategic sourcing. You got to be able to segment them and then go to the next level and look at saying, what is the requirement of the information I'm gathering? What is it, and how do I apply it to assure it? And how do I know? Because let's face it, there are challenges out there. And the more extended the supply chain, the more difficult it is to ensure compliance. And now there's an accountability from end to end, or a growing accountability, where you can no longer say, well, you know, that was the supplier who shipped it. I didn't know that.
Okay, yeah, I would love to continue with like the last sentence you said, like the complex supply chains that are evolving at the moment. How do you think could Gen AI help to mitigate these risks, or even like maybe even conduct a scenario modeling of risk that could happen throughout the supply chain?
You know, it's funny. I'm going to go back to this. I was having a discussion with Patrick Marlow online. He's the head AI thought leader for Google, and I actually wrote the article about it. And he said, you know, the trouble with people in Gen AI is that, let me use this analogy. Manufacturer builds a beautiful car, has all the features, all the functions, can do so many things, and the driver drives it into a lake. And then the driver gets out and says to the manufacturer of the car, look what you did. It isn't working. And Marlowe said at that point, and it stuck with me, is that, you know what? It's the people driving it. It's that you know, you can't blame. So Gen AI isn't a problem. See, I think you ought to phrase the question. Gen AI isn't going to redefine the procurement practice. It is a heck of a great tool. AI is a great tool. All of these things. I mean, we haven't even figured out, most organizations, how to use AI-driven solutions. I mean, back in the late 90s and 2000s, when I built that, I mean, those principles still work today. So the technology can advance. We've got to start thinking about it from a practical user standpoint. We've got to start thinking about it from the standpoint of not saying, how can Gen AI make it better? The real question should be is, how can I help the end user or the client to leverage AI, Gen AI, platforms, and whatever's going to be 15 years from now to be able to better utilize that? We want better drivers rather than better cars, because a better car that ends up in the lake is not going to matter. That's the simple thing. And I think that's the key that a lot of people miss. I love technology. I mean, like I said, you know, 40 plus years in this, I've seen the CPM days, the DOS days, I've seen floppy drives, I've seen hard drives. I remember when the PC first came out, the 8086, they said, we never really need anything more than a 10 gigabyte hard drive. That's big enough forever. The reality is technology will always evolve. It is a tool, but I think far too many people associate, and this is the greater risk with Gen AI, is associate that, well, this is all automatic now. This is all, you know, we don't have to worry about expertise or experience in what our job is. Gen AI will tell us what to do. And let's face it, that's, you know, that's not going to make any technology work. So that, again, the real question is, how can we use technology, past, present, and future, more effectively? How can we get away from that 80% rate of initiative failures that have been decades running?
Okay, then continuing with that, what would you advise a company that want to use Gen AI in their procurement process to be successfully and don't face the challenge you mentioned?
Take a step back, and going to the first example I gave with the D&D, if you're leading with a technology process people or a process technology people approach, you won't succeed. I don't care what Gen AI can do. You will not succeed. You have to start from the point of the mindset of agent-based, people, process, technology. You have to understand the stakeholders, like I did when I went in and said, and again, when I said to them, what time of day do orders received? They're saying, what does that have to do with automating the procurement function? Now, if I was selling technology, had my blinders on, say technology is the answer, I would have implemented technology that would have only made their inefficiency faster. But what you have to do to start is put the technology aside, because we know it works. It's more stable now than it ever has been. And we have to look and say, okay, what is the service department doing? What is the supplier doing? What is the courier doing? What is the customs doing? Who are key stakeholders? And that goes back to my original theory, which is why the government funded it, is that strand commonality is the ability to look at seemingly disparate or unrelated strands of data and find the common attributes that do have effect. And by the way, this works for everything. Strand commonality applies to everything. The key is to identify where those attributes are. And then after understanding that, using an agent-based model, you then are able to start leveraging technology to be able to make it work not only individually, but collectively.
Okay. Can you give me an example of maybe a model or a company who implemented it successfully and made it work?
D&D. I can send you the links to those case studies. You can, I'll send you some of the preliminary details, and I'll even send you the paper written way back when in 2004 about it was called Acres of Diamonds. I'll also send you the link to the Commonwealth of Virginia's EVA program, because when they contacted me in 2007, I've spoken with, and at certainly a number of their events, they employed an agent-based model. And the one thing that they discovered with this is it didn't become a software initiative. It didn't become a cost justification initiative. They were able to focus. And what was interesting in that case, Ariba was originally what they were using, but they've changed different vendors, solution providers. They said we would have been successful with any solution provider because we took the ownership and the understanding of an agent-based model. So I'll send you those two, and you'll be able to look at them and any supporting documents you need. I mean, I have many years of archives, so I can do that. The trouble is that there are not a lot of companies who have been successful. I'll send you a separate paper on SAP that I wrote for the Cato Alliance back in 2008, where it goes through all the companies. You know, it's not just the end clients that have had challenges, but even companies like Hewlett Packard have not been able to successfully implement their own technology or implement their own strategy. And you'll see that with history and actual cases. So I'll send those to you after the call, and that'll be a good starting point.
Okay, perfect. So taking a step even forward, what would you think that, how will the procurement processes change in the future when the implementation will maybe be successful for many companies? How will the procurement process in there change? Do you think that there will be an influence?
Could you ask that again, because you're sort of breaking up a little?
Oh, okay, sorry. My question was to take even a step forward. Do you think that if the generative AI models will be implemented successfully, do you think that the processes will change somehow in the future?
Okay, so here's the whole point. What's the sign of a process change? With the Department of Defense project, they went from 23 down to 3 buyers in 18 months. That's tangible, measurable results, FTE. They improved their delivery performance from 51% next day to 97% next day. Those are outcomes you'll see. The technology is not going to bring that about. GenAI is a powerful tool. AI is a powerful tool, but it's become a buzzword, saying GenAI, it'll fix the world. It won't. It's not like Ozempic. I don't know if you know what Ozempic is, but people take it for diabetes, and they found out it was a weight loss. So nobody wants to exercise anymore. Nobody wants to do anything. I'll take an Ozempic. They're looking for an Ozempic equivalent with AI. The reality is processes don't change as much as they become refined based upon agent-based understanding. Remember, I said at the very beginning, we weren't going to change the service. First of all, before I even stepped in, the service department and their sandbagging orders until 4 o'clock wasn't even known to the procurement department. Everyone was in these silos. So if you don't break out and set up an agent base, and you're just equation based, how will technology change the process? No, technology comes as the last part of it. If they haven't gone through the first part of understanding, process understanding and alignment, and the paper I'm going to send you, it doesn't matter how advanced technology gets. And it has advanced over 40 years, but we're still getting the same results. So the reality is number one, understand the current process. Understand how you can adapt and work with those and the impact it has. Understand the element of change. Change management. The more change management you need in a project, the more poorly you have invested in understanding how it works. Change management. And you know, I'll digress here. I don't know if you remember SAP, Microsoft's play to get SAP to buy SAP. Duet, and then, well, it was originally called the Mendocino Project. And the whole idea of what they wanted to do was say, we're getting user resistance. So what we're going to do is create a user-friendly interface. You know, everyone loved Office at that point. We're going to create that because that's going to lead to greater adoption. Now, ultimately, nothing came of Duet and the original Mendocino. But the reality was, the thinking there is, it was a technical issue. Change management. It's not the technology. It's the lack of understanding of how processes work and how they combine. And I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, Tom. Strand commonality is the foundation for really understanding the key attributes in seemingly disparate strands of data, information, and operation that enable you to understand how they collectively impact, how they work individually, and then how they work collectively. And that's really what I go back to that again. Processes don't change. They can be improved within their own stream, but they're not going to change. And you've got to be able to understand how to be able to adapt the technology to the people and the process.
Okay. Yeah, I would continue then with you already mentioned it a little bit with the people. Do you think that the role of the people will change somehow?
Do I think procurement professionals will have to change?
Yeah, procurement professionals.
And in 2005, I wrote The Executive of the Future, what it looks like based upon a CPO agenda roundtable. And one of the things that has remained really has become even more relevant was that the CPOs and C-suite executives said, we will take one strategic buyer over 10 run-of-the-mills everyday functional buyers. You know the difference between the two. And this was back in 2005. There is no difference between purchasing, procurement, strategic sourcing. Procurement professionals have to evolve. Think of it this way. What were the 3 out of those 23? Why were they still focused on the D&D? We equipped them better. They were the best to run it. Now, I don't know the other people, you know, they found other uses for those assets. But the reality is that procurement professionals have to stop thinking in terms of transactional. They have to think of the complexity and the impact beyond their traditional scope. And they have to look at it and say, okay, I have to understand how every piece works in here and take the lead on that understanding. I have to understand internal stakeholders, how they work. I have to understand. See, one of the biggest complaints that keeps coming back from procurement, purchasing people is saying, well, you know, we're just giving a list of qualifications of what we need or a list of what we need to buy and just go out there and buy it. Those are transactional duties that are going to disappear. What you need is you need to have strategic thinkers who are involved in every aspect of the business. In other words, they have to know not only about their own department and their own operations, the procurement professional of the future, which is the near future, it's not a long ways off, has to understand all the individual working parts, both within and external, and then take responsibility for that. And that's really the key part of it. So in 2005, what is a strategic thinker? They're still talking about that. They're talking about technology being able to free up procurement people to focus on more strategic tasks. Yet there's, you know, there's still that common transactional mindset that sticks in there. So, you know, I think, you know, to be blunt, procurement professionals have to, you know, stop abdicating and start stepping up and saying, we're going to take the lead. And never mind this, oh, we would like a seat at the table, because procurement is the table.
Okay. Yeah, then to round this really insightful interview up, I would ask you one last question
Sure.
who is looking into the future somehow, and it's probably a bit classic question, but what do you think, what will the future of procurement will look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
In the next what? Sorry, you broke out there again.
Five
In the
to
next
10 years.
5 to 10 years. Well, I mean, there's two answers on that. If they don't start listening to agent-based versus equation-based modeling, we're going to be having this same discussion 10 to 15 years from now. It's like we had it 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So that's number one. But the reality is I think that you're running into an era where technology, people are more comfortable with it. We've got mobility, we've got access 24/7, we've got all of these other elements. So the technology will give us the tools. Are we going to be able to train the procurement professionals to use those tools beyond their narrow scope? And I think that's really the key part. But it's not just the procurement function. I'll close with this. I gave a lecture very similar to this a number of years ago. And after the lecture, a couple of people came up to me and said, we're really excited about this, but we got to go back into our company Monday to meet the same old management and the same old status. What do we do? And I gave a blunt answer, which certainly rocked a few boats. I said, well, either they change or you change. You move your job to someone else and pick a company that is thinking. Again, I'll use the example of the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is it continues to thrive. Not everybody loves Eva. You're never going to get a consensus of 100%, but the program, the solid foundation, is still there and in place. So I think what you have to do is you have to have buyers who and suppliers, or buyers and purchasers and procurement and strategic sourcing, who have the motivation to learn everything there is to learn about their business, not only within the realm of their functionality, but the business overall. They have to know more about the service department than the service department. They have to know more about finance than the finance department. They have to know more about the challenges their suppliers are facing. And if you don't have the determination to do that, no amount of technology in the world is going to save you.
Okay, thanks. That were really nice words for the ending. I would stop then from here the recording, and we can have a little chat now for the last minutes we have. First of all, thanks for the interview. It was really insightful, really nice. I learned a lot. It was bit different to the interviews I had so far, to be honest, but it was really insightful. It was a great perspective, a bit different, but that's great for my thesis, I would say, because now I can have different perspectives on the topic. So thanks for that. Is there anything you want to add, or?
All I can say is, with whatever you do, I live by a simple rule, and I recommend this to everyone else. Don't worry about being right, worry about getting it right, because that changes the whole perspective. Any discussions like these are not a matter of trying to achieve consensus, but to stimulate deeper thought and have new ideas. When I did 900 radio shows, Tom, and I interviewed people, one of the things that was the best compliment to me from my guests, some captains of industry, was, you actually made me think of my own topic in a whole different light. And that is where growth and understanding and insight comes from. So that's really what it is. So when you're looking at all of these things, challenge, question, disagree, because that is what opens up the door to even greater understanding.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, then to close this interview, I would just have one question left. Do you have any other people in your network who could assist me for more interviews?
Yeah, sure. I'll send you a couple of names and introductions that I think would be ideal for that, because you're the next generation, Tom. So
I hope so.
we got to get this. We got to get this figured out. We're there, but yeah, I'll send you a couple names as well. By tomorrow, I'll send you all those links and the
Perfect.
material because it'll provide some further detail. I'll also send you a couple of names, introductions, etc., and take it from there.
Perfect. Thank you a lot.
No problem. Listen, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Tom.
Well, the pleasure is also on my side. It was great.
Take care.
Take care. I wish you a great day.